In this series, we're going to be working on blend shapes for our faceshift project. We're still using the same dazed model as before. When it comes to the motion of the head, there's not really much skeletal motion going on. If you look at the skeletal view, which I made as one of my projects as a freshman, then you can see that about the only motion going on is from the jaw. And it doesn't really move a lot. It moves about 10 degrees up and down. And it moves about 5 degrees left and right, which isn't a great deal of movement when it comes to driving the skin shapes of the face. So most of the face contours come from the muscles. And if you look at the muscles that control the lower portion of the face, there's about 12 muscles that are all connected to the mouth. And these muscles drive the shape of the lips and the cheeks and the lower jaw. In this Digital Tutors course by Andrew Conroy, he drew these fine pictures that define the difference between the bone, the muscles, and the fat, and how they react to the face shapes, as well as the primary, the secondary muscle movements, and the reactionary skin movements. In this book by Fagin, it goes through the scientific nomenclatures for each and every muscle in the face and how they affect the different shapes that the face makes. So like I said, there's only about 12 different muscle groups that control facial movement and expression. Back to the book from Fagin, he theorized that there are only 6 archetypes that make up every facial expression that we have. And then he went on to talk about how they can be defined by the different muscle movements. In the expression of sadness, you can see that the brows are furrowed, the sneer muscles are contracted on either side of the nose, and the top lip is relatively flat, while the bottom lip has been extended to the lowest point by these 2 muscles. Going on to the face defining anger, you can also see that the brows are furrowed and the sneer muscles are nearly completely contracted to wrinkle the nose. But in this case, the 2 upper muscles are moving the upper lip to its highest point. If we look at the expression for joy, the ocularis muscles around the eye are fully contracted, and the cheekbones have the fat pushed out on the sides because the muscles are also completely contracted. If we look at the place of the mouth, the edges are even with the top set of teeth on the upper jaw. If we look at fear, the ocularis muscles are completely opened, and the eyebrows are moved up as far as they will go on the head. Again, we can see that the edges of the mouth are near the lower jaw. If we look at the shape for disgust, we can see that the brows and cheeks are pushed down so far that the nose is wrinkled and there's crow's feet on the eyes. The sneer wrinkle also follows all the way down to the end of the jaw, and the cheek muscles are pressed out because of the contracted muscles. In the shape of surprise, we can also see that the ocularis is open and that the upper eyelid is clearly above the iris because the brows have raised up to their upper limit. The cheeks are also pushing out because the muscles are contracted, and the edge of the mouth is even with the upper jaw. The placement of the eyes has a great deal to do with emotion, and if we look at the expression for anger, we can see that the upper eyelids are clearly at the top of the iris, and that the lower lids come all the way up to the bottom of the pupil. Another point that Fagin makes about the eyes is that they are not oval shaped, they are in fact oblong. Here I have a picture of the 20 faces that you initially have to plug in to faceshift to get it to map your expressions. This usually takes about 20 minutes. These are the 48 characters that we're going to have to make as blend shapes for our model. I've laid them out in a pattern of 6 rows with 8 expressions in each row. I've also numbered them and given them the correct nomenclature to line up with naming conventions in faceshift. The first thing we want to do is make a base mesh. So we're going to duplicate the mesh from our model and drop it below the model set. We're going to rename it base mesh. And we're going to select the variables and unlock them. Next, we're going to go to the Modify tab and Center Pivot. And then we're going to move our mesh over to the side about 40 in the Translate X. Next, we're going to right-click and go down to Assign Existing Material. We're going to pick the base material, Lambert 1. Then we want to select our mesh and press 1. Because when you have 48 meshes with this many polygons, it will slow down even the fastest video card. Now we're going to go into our orthographic view, and we're going to select the faces on the body. I just found that this helps keep things neat. By control clicking, we can find a nice point on the neck to separate the head from the body. Once we have the faces selected, instead of deleting them, we're going to right-click over the model, go down to Assign Existing Material, and assign this material that we've made called Clear. Once we go back to our object mode, we can see that the model is still there, but it is now invisible. And if we go to the attribute editor and look at Clear, we're going to delete the history first. If we look at this texture Clear, it's just a Lambert with the transparency turned all the way up. In order to create this Lambert, what you can do is right-click on the model, go to Assign New Material, pick Lambert, and then turn the transparency all the way up and rename the Lambert to Clear. Then you can see I'm going through and I am reusing the joints that we made in our first lesson, which correspond to the markers that they use in faceshift. Here we're plugging in the nose and the lips. This took about 2 hours, and at 100 times speed, it still takes about 10 minutes to go through it. The reason that we're using the markers from the actual mocap in faceshift is because it will give us an idea of where faceshift is going to attach to the mesh on our dazed model, since all dazed models are fairly much the same when it comes to their mesh. They might be different shapes, but the number of polygons and the placement of the edge loops are in the exact same place. So we're using a method in creating our blend shapes. First, we're looking where the markers are from the faceshift program and where they're going to attach to the mesh on the dazed model. Next, we're going to look at the shapes of the blend shapes and how they correspond to the edge loops and the polygons on our dazed model. And then finally, we're going to compare them to our face in the mirror or pictures from magazines and actors that we like so that we can try to copy the shapes of their faces, like particular dimples or the curve of their smile or perhaps their sneer of disgust, so that we can transfer that into our faceshift model. It's really the sky is the limit when it comes to creating your blend shapes. But don't expect to get them right on the first time. I had to redo my blend shapes nearly 3 times before I came up with a set that I was content to use with this lesson we're making today. We're also going to go over a few pointers what to do and what not to do. So, now that we have our nose and our mouth skinned to the marker joints, we're going to go through our blend shapes, and I'm picking number 33, the lip stretch left, to demonstrate some of the tools that we can use. First, when you smile, your mouth gets pulled back towards the skull. So we're going to move the lips back just a little bit. Next, it goes up just a little bit. So we're going to move our joints up just a small bit, but not enough to correspond to a smile. Then we're going to move the side of the mouth out to the side, because the muscles naturally pull the mouth to the side. If you'll notice, we're picking up some wrinkling in our model where we've moved the mesh. We're going to move the side of the mouth out just a little bit farther because it doesn't quite look natural. Once we find a natural looking shape that we like, then we're going to select our mesh. By the way, to get the markers there, I duplicated them from the original model and lined them up with our base mesh, which is still at about 40. Next, we're going to duplicate the mesh that we've just made so we can save the mesh that has the markers attached to it to make the other blend shapes. Once we're happy with this mesh and we've duplicated, we'll select it, and then we want to go to this tool right here, which is the Sculpt Geometry tool. It can be found at the end of the Polygons tab on the shelf. I'm selecting the Smooth mode, which is set to about 0.1 because my model is very small. If you increase the size of your model, you can also increase the density of your brush. You have to have the mesh selected to be able to apply the brush. To make the brush larger or smaller, we just push the B key and click drag like all artisan brushes. Then we can go over and smooth the polygons, but we don't want to smooth them too much, otherwise they'll go back to their default shape. What we're doing is we are smoothing out the creases that we could see that were formed in the edges of the polygons. And if we look at the model, we can see that just a little smoothing removes the creases, even though we're at the subdivision 1 level. We forgot to freeze the transformations on our joints, but that's not a problem. We can move them back into place using our orthographic view. Or, since we copied them from the original joints, we can go and find what the actual joint placement was. Although that's rather fickle, and we probably should have froze the transformations before we skinned our object. Not to matter, this is not required to make blend shapes. You can make the blend shapes without the markers. I'm just using them because it gives me a good idea of how the mesh is going to react to the actual faceshift program. As you notice, the lip stretch left looks a lot like the lip stretch right, and we should be able to just copy them straight over. We can go back to compare to our pictures for reference several times, or even open up faceshift itself and compare to the models right on faceshift. In this next part, we're going to start with our base mesh. And we are going to simulate, I believe, eyebrows. Once I find my default picture that I'm using for reference. Picture is over 8,000 pixels, so takes a minute to load. Actually, we're going to start with the eye down left in this part to demonstrate the different tools. So we're going to select our mesh, and we'll select the faces. Going to select the upper and lower eyelash. Then we want to select the lacrima and the tear duct. By shift clicking, we can select these different parts. Then by using the angle bracket, we can expand our selection. Then we're going to go to the inside of the model and select the edges of the eye. The eyes are some of the easiest blend shapes to make after you get done with the blink. Next, we're going to expand our selection to include a lot of the faces around the eye, and then we'll control click to deselect the faces that we don't want in our selection. You can press Ctrl Z at any time to go back. We're not trying to be extremely particular about which faces we select. They don't have to be completely symmetrical. We just want a rough outline of where the ocularis oculi muscle is around the eye, which controls the eye left and right movement. Once we have our faces selected, we're going to open up the Tool tab, and we want to go down to the Soft Select section, which is about halfway down. Then we will turn on Soft Select, and this will allow us to move not only the faces we've selected, but also the vertices around them. If we increase the fall off radius, it will end up selecting the entire mesh. Like I said, since my model is particularly small, we're using about 0.1. We can also adjust the fall off radius by changing the curve, the fall off curve. If you press the X, it will delete the point. If you click on it, it will create another one. And you can raise and lower the fall off curve. Yellow moves every face and vertex. Orange moves them about 10%, and black does not move them at all. By changing the fall off color, you can also adjust the area of influence, and there are some presets. But we won't get into that too deeply. We're going to use 0.1. And we're using the eye down left, so we're going to move it down just slightly. The ocularis oculi does not move the eye socket a great deal during facial expression. If we notice in our orthographic view, we can see that the left eye has, in fact, marginally moved lower than the right eye. I'm using the bottom of the window to give a good guess of how much it's moved. It looks like it's only moved about a centimeter. Once we have the eye socket in the position that we want, we're going to go back to our Sculpt Geometry tool. Opening up our tool settings, you can see it has different brush profiles, and it has a push, pull, smooth, relax, pinch, slide, and erase button. We're mostly going to be using the smooth, although this does have many of the functions that Mudbox has. If we move the opacity up to 1, we're going to test it out on the curve of the nose here. You can see that moving it just a small bit flattens the nose in no time at all. By pressing Ctrl Z, we'll go back before and lower our opacity to 0.1. Again, you can see that at 0.1 it still flattens the side of the nose, but it takes more revolutions to flatten it. And at 0.01, it takes nearly 8 times to smooth the mesh than it did at the power of 1. So, using a brush with the opacity of 0.01, we're going to roughly smooth around the polygons that we've just moved so that they'll fit in with the rest of the mesh without leaving any jaggy edges. Considering that there are a lot of contours on the eye, we don't want to smooth them too much, otherwise we'll lose the overall shape of the face. You can also smooth from the inside of the mesh. Like all artisan brushes, this tool works on a per vertice basis, so you can go down and adjust individual vertices with the brush. Once we have a shape that we like, then we can go over to the Deformation tab, where we're going to check out the Soft Modification tool, which is similar to the other tools we've used, but it has its own benefits. Once you place the Soft Modification tool on the mesh, you can see that it has a fall-off radius, like the Soft Select. But in this case, it won't work very well for our eye. If we place it around the eye, we don't get full coverage on the eye. We can go above the eye or below the eye, but to move the entire eye socket, we can't seem to select it correctly. Unlike the Soft Modification tool and the Geometry Sculpt tool, it does not update in real time. We can change the fall-off radius, just like the Soft Modification, just like Soft Select, but it does not update. We'll go up to the top of the head to show this. If we move down the fall-off radius to halfway, then there's less yellow and more orange. If we raise it up higher, you can see that there's more yellow. The same is true also of increasing and decreasing the fall-off radius. By decreasing it to 0.2, it covers half the area that it does at 0.1. At 0.4, it is slightly larger than the 0.5 we were using before. Some of the benefits of the Soft Modification tool are that you can use all of the different transform tools. You can scale in any direction. You can also reselect it after it has been put on the mesh just by clicking on the S. You can scroll through your different transformation tools and use them to adjust the soft selection after it has been placed, as you can see, like I'm doing with the rotate, move, and scale tools here. Sometimes this makes the adjustment of mesh easier than trying to use it by a per face or a per vertex level. Notice that the fall-off radius stays true after the soft select has been placed on there. If you decide that you do not like your soft select, you can simply select it and delete it. However, by deleting it, the mesh loses its influence. However, if you apply the Soft Modification tool and then go up to Edit, Delete by Type History, it deletes the Soft Modification tool, but the mesh change has stayed. So, back to making our blend shape with the left eye down. We're going to show first how not to make a mirror image of your blend shape. Our first mesh we're going to name eye down left with the naming convention of faceshift. And our mirror shape we're going to name eye down right. We'll move eye down right a few spaces to the right, and we will rotate it in the scale X, making it -X so that it is a mirror image of eye down left. Then we're going to go to our animation editors. We'll go to blend shapes, and we're going to select first the blend shapes, then our base mesh, then we'll go to create deformers, blend shape, open up our option box. The default options should work for this, and we'll go to create. So even though both of our blend shapes are mirror images of each other, when we go to our base mesh and we look at the blend shapes that we've made, when we move the left eye down, it works correctly. But when we use the mirror image of the right eye down, it is just a copy of the left, and it does not mirror the blend shape. So we're going to delete our blend shape. We'll go back to right eye down, and we will 0 our translate X to bring it to its origin. Then we are going to go to modification and freeze transformations. This will save it in the mirrored image. Then we'll move it back to 40. And you can see that the scale X has now been zeroed. We'll select them again, select our base mesh, go to create deformers, blend shape. And again, when we look at our base mesh, even though we have zeroed out the -X scale, when we move our left eye shape, it works correctly. But when we move our right, what is this? The entire mesh flips over, and that just will not work. So we will delete those blend shapes as well as our mirrored mesh. And like a dummy, I also used my base mesh and didn't save it. So after we've created our base mesh again with our custom texture on it, then we will duplicate it. And our first duplication of our base mesh, we're going to call -X, but gives us an argument, so we will write it out full hand, -X. Then we will duplicate it again, and the next one we're going to call wrap. So first we select our original mesh, the eye down left. Then we will select -X. First though, we want to take -X and truly give it a -1 value in the scale X. So we take our first copy and -1 in scale X. Then we will select the eye down, the source mesh, which is the eye down left. Next, we will select -X. So first our source mesh, then -X. Then we'll go to create deformers, blend shape. Doesn't have to be anything special. After this, we will select our wrap mesh, and then we will select our -X mesh. We will go to create deformers and create a wrap deformer. We want to make sure that exclusive bind is turned on. Now we're going to go back to -X, and in the channel box, we'll scroll down to our blend shapes, and we're going to turn on the eye down one. As you can see, it also affects the wrap deformer. These have to be in the exact same origin, otherwise it won't work. Next, we're going to duplicate our wrap mesh, and we can delete our original 3 meshes. We're going to rename our wrap mesh to eye down right, And you can see that we now have a mirror image. And my Windows key is going off again. So we'll select eye down left, eye down right, and our base mesh, or our target mesh, which is the model we've been using. We're going to use our generic blend shape settings. And when we go to our model, now when we open up our blend shapes, we'll notice that the eye down left works correctly, as well as its mirror image eye down right. So that way, we don't have to create all those blend shapes. Instead of 48, we can probably get away with only doing 30. Just duplicating the ones that are matched. But what about a double blend shape, like this browse up center we have? We can do a browse left and a browse right, but we still have to use a browse center. So we're going to duplicate our base mesh and we will call it browse up left to start. Going to move it to 40. And we will just select a couple faces I went through earlier, and I found the faces that correspond to the eyebrow, which is drawn onto our dazed model. So we will select the faces that correspond to the eyebrow on the dazed model, which is about 4 or 5 just above the eye. And then to give it just a little bit of contour, we're going to select a few just above the eye to give it some wrinkles on the forehead. But we are working on a young girl, so we don't want to create too many wrinkles. Once we have some faces selected that we like, we will move them up slightly. I'm going to deselect the top ones by control clicking. We'll turn on our tool, turn on our soft select, and move our faces up just slightly. Deselecting the upper regions and giving them a nice fall off by deselecting some of the faces as we raise them so that there is a more pronounced lift in the center and a less pronounced lift on the edge. But we don't want to just move them up. When the muscle contracts, it also has a slight bulge, so we're going to move our faces out just slightly. Again, giving them a nice fall off by deselecting the faces as we go along. Once we have a nice outline for our brow up, we are going to select our mesh and go to object mode. Then we are going to select our soft modification tool. We're again going to use smooth at the 0.01, and we're going to smooth out the rough edges of our eyebrow so that there's no rough edges showing, giving it an overall blended appearance with the rest of the skin. Remembering to check on the side to make sure that our wrinkles are not too pronounced, since we are, after all, working on a girl. As you can see, even making an eyebrow lift, which seems complicated, doesn't take more than just a minute or two with the help of these tools. So now that we have the mesh that we want, we are going to select our base mesh. This is where my program freezes up. Sometimes it does this, I don't know why. So what I'm going to do is save it and then turn everything off and restart the program. Now that we have our mesh back, we're going to duplicate our base mesh. We're going to set it to -X, just like we did last time. Then we are going to select our source mesh and our target mesh and create a blend shape. Then we're going to duplicate our base mesh a second time. Select our second duplicate and our first duplicate and create a wrap deformer. Then we will select duplicate 1 and we will turn on the blend shape to its full value. Then we will take duplicate 2 and duplicate it a third time, deleting the original meshes and remembering to rename it with the proper naming convention, browse up right. Now we will move our browse up right mesh over. We will duplicate our base mesh a fourth time and select both browse up left and right and our target mesh, and we will create a blend shape. Then we'll open up our blend shape menu and we will raise our eyes, our brows left and right, activate the blend shapes. Then we will duplicate mesh 4 a fifth time and delete the original, leaving us with a mesh that has both left and right brows raised and will not interfere with our model. As we can see, we will move our brows up, left, right, and center, and we will attach them to another base mesh. Create some blend shapes. Go to our blend shape controller. We'll move our up center over to 42. And then looking at our base mesh, we can see that both the brows up, left, and right, and center does in fact work correctly without any errors. So that's how you do a duplicate. Once you have all of your blend shapes completed, all 48 of them, you want to select them in chronological order, like the naming conventions from faceshift. This will make it easier once we integrate it into faceshift. We're selecting every single one in order, one at a time, to make sure that we get them right. Not forgetting to select our target mesh last. Then we'll go to Create Deformers, Blend Shape. We're going to open up the Options box and name it Blend Faceshift. This will make it easier to find in the inputs for the model. Then we'll hit Create, open up our window, Animation Editor's Blend Shape. As you can see, I have them set up vertically here. If you want to change that, you can go to the Options, Orientation, switch them between vertical and horizontal. I find that it works better to have them in horizontal for what we're going to do next. We'll move this off to the side. We want to go up to... First, I'm turning off my blend shapes. It looks like I forgot a few, so we'll select them, add them to the layer. And we're going to turn on our sliders that we made from lesson 1. We're going to go to Animate, Set Driven Key, and Set. That will open up the Set Driven Key box. Then we want to select our base mesh. We'll go over to the channel box and scroll down to our inputs until we find Blend Faceshift. We'll add that as our driven, selecting Blend Faceshift in the driven box. Then we're going to go to our sliders that we've custom made here. And we're going to select the first slider. Just going to turn off my base model so it doesn't get in the way. And we'll select the first slider, which is in chronological order. We want to select the translate Y, and then we'll make sure that the naming convention is correct, and we will key it in the 0 position. Then we want to raise the slider first and the blend shape second and key it again. Moving on to our next slider, hitting load driver, checking that the naming convention is right, selecting translate Y, selecting our proper blend shape, raising first the slider, then the blend shape, and then keying a second time. And we're going to go through and match up each and every one of these sliders with each and every blend shape, going through the same process over again. Somebody could probably write a script for this, but I'm not one of those script people. If you'll notice, it doesn't take a particularly long time to do it by hand. It only took about 5 or 10 minutes to do each and every one of these. Once they're all selected, we'll make sure they're in the 0 position. Then we're going to turn on our model again. And we're going to test them to make sure that they are in fact correct. But first, we notice that our eye mesh does not match up with our blend shapes. So we're going to scroll down to the meshes that we separated. We're going to select the eye bone in the skeleton. And we're going to load the eye bone as the driver. Since it's cockeyed, we have to select the translate and the rotate options. We're going to go to our models, select our blend shapes, and load them as the driver this time. And we will find the eye down right, which is the first blend shape that we are going to drive the eye bone with. So we will move our eye down right blend shape into the maximum position. Then we will select our right eye. And we'll key in the 0 position. Then we will raise our blend shape to the uppermost position. And we want to line up the top of the pupil with the bottom of the upper eyelid, so that the eyeball will move with the ocularis muscle when we move the blend shape. Then we want to go through for the other 4 directions on the right eye, keying them with the eye bone, and then moving them to the maximum position, and keying them again, doing this for both eyes. Now, the eyeballs will move with the blend shapes. Next, we want to go down to, it looks like I'm going to test all my blend shapes to make sure that they have in fact been loaded correctly and are not giving off any strange deformations. Like they say, measure twice, cut once. While I'm doing this, I've noticed that I haven't done keyframes on my lower jaw. So I'm going to open up my blend shapes, also going to open up the set driven key box, which is under the Animate tab. Then again, we're going to load the blend shapes as the driver. Selecting the blend shapes. This time we're going to scroll down to the face parts. We're going to select the lower teeth that we separated in our first lesson, and we're going to freeze the transformations. We're going to press Insert, and we're going to move the object's pivot point and line it up with the lower jaw. Pressing Insert first to move it, and then pressing Insert again once we have it in place. We're going to duplicate this with the tongue. Going into the orthographic view, pressing Insert, and moving the object's pivot point. Once we have the pivots lined up, then we're going to load the lower teeth as our driven object. We're going to find mouth or jaw open as our driver, and key them in the 0 position. Then we're going to go into our orthographic view so we can see what we're doing. We're going to find our jaw open blend shape, move it into the maximum position, and then find a nice setting for our lower jaw. I think I decide on about 12 after everything is said and done. But that all depends on the size of your blend shapes and where you want your gum line to be lined up with your lower lip. Once we have the maximum value, we're going to key it again, and now the lower jaw will move with the lower lip. Next, we're going to set keyframes for the jaw left in the rotate Y, keying it for 0, moving the blend shape to the maximum amount, and then moving the rotate Y, I believe I decided on 5 degrees, keying it. Then we're going to do the same for jaw right, keying it in the negative. Then we're going to copy the entire process for the tongue. So when we finish, when we use the mouth blend shapes, the lower jaw will correspond to the shape of the lower lip, as you can see here with the chew functions and the jaw open functions. Now that we have all of our blend shapes set and our objects keyed, we're going to save our scene because that is a good day's work right there. Next, we're going to show something not to do, which I discovered after I had finished this the first time, and I had to do it all over again. If you notice, when we close the eyes, and then we move down to the lips pucker blend shape, we can mix the blend shapes of both the left and right eye and the lips pucker. We can also mix them with the jaw smile, because all of our blend shapes are in the same group. So before we mess this up, we're going to save it, have a good starting point. Then we're going to go to our animation editors and open up our blend shapes. And we're going to delete all the blend shapes that we just made. You don't have to do this, I'm just showing you. So we're going to select all of our blend shapes for the eye, first of all. And then we're going to create deformers blend shape. We're going to give them a naming convention of blend eye. If you'll notice, I also forgot to select my target mesh. You don't want to do that. Next, we're going to select the brows and the jaw, and we'll create a second group, and we will call it blend shape jaw brow, and apply. Then third, we will select all of our mouth blend shapes, and we will also group them. We will call these blend mouth. And we will select our remaining 6 blend shapes and call them miscellaneous. And when we open up our blend shape driver here in the animation editors, you'll notice when we move our blend shapes, they do absolutely nothing because we forgot to connect them to our target mesh. So we will delete all these nice fancy groups that we made and start over again. Using the same grouping methods that we did the first time, but this time selecting our target mesh. Using our first group, blend eye, and apply. Then going down and selecting a brows and jaw group. Selecting our target mesh, giving our name, jaw and brow. And lastly, selecting our mouth group. Not forgetting to select our target mesh. And taking our miscellaneous 6 remaining blend shapes, also connecting them to the target mesh. And naming them miscellaneous. If we look at our blend shapes now, and we blink our left and right eye as we did in our first scenario, both the left and right eye are closed. And then we go down to our mouth blend shapes and we find the pucker blend. We'll notice when we try to make the kissy face, every time we lift the eyes, the mouth pucker blend, it opens the eyes. And that's because they're on separate groups. So, no matter which one of these blend shapes we choose, they're always going to block out the initial blend shapes. Whether we use the funnel, or whether we use the sneer, they're all going to make the eyes open because they are in different groups. So all of our blend shapes for face shift have to be in the same group.